to me, it's just black and white. Like, God calls us to love individuals who are experiencing homelessness, experiencing crisis, and living without the kind of resources that we have. And he calls us to compassionately come alongside them and share.
You're listening to Car Seat Questions, a podcast for parents of curious kids. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Eddie. And if you're anything like us, you either have a kid or you care for a kid with questions about all sorts of things.
So, for the next half hour, hop into the passenger seat, buckle your belt, and become childlike with us as the Lord takes us where He wants us to go.
Enjoy the show.
I have a friend who lives in the Uptown neighborhood of Chicago, and Uptown is pretty, I guess you could say notorious, is well known for having a large homeless population. There's a lot of homeless shelters in Uptown, and in Chicago, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but in Chicago, we have things called tent cities. So those experiencing homelessness will set up their tents under viaducts and bridges and things like that, you know, to stay away from elements. And to get to their house, they had to go under the same bridge every day, like to and from work. And their son, I think he was probably like 4, 5, 6 at the time. He said one day, like, Mom and Dad, why don't we stop and give money to them every time? And that my friend, the dad, had to say, you know, like, we don't always have money to give all the time, and we do this twice a day. It would just be a lot for us to do this all day, every day. And we serve in other ways. We serve the homeless community in other ways. You know, they come to our church and we serve at the homeless shelter. But if you feel like that is something that you want to do, if you feel like that's how you want to serve this community, I will give you a roll of quarters and you can use that as you see fit. If you want to stop every time that we're going to and from work, that's great. If you just want to stop sometimes or whenever you're feeling like that's what you need to do, that's what we'll do. And so they started keeping a roll of quarters in the car for him to give to the folks that they see under the bridge on their way home every day. And that just like really stuck with me. And I think about it somewhat often of how they really empowered their son to do, you know, something about the feelings he was having. He felt, I need to do something about this. I know this is not how it should be. How can I, like, what can I do? And why aren't we doing something about it? And being curious enough to like ask the question of, hey, like, why aren't you guys doing that? And I want to do something about it. And I think that's like what I really love about kids. Number one, how honest they are is like, hey, you guys should be doing something and you're not. And also, I would like to do something about this. How do we do that? And being curious enough to like ask the question and not being like, as adults, we're like scared to talk about homelessness and we're scared to talk about, you know, people who are different than us, but kids are not. And they're just like, hey, that's different. And that looks like something that is different than how we live. Can we talk about that? And so I just was really struck by that story and kind of spurs me on to like want to be able to empower our kids to serve those experiencing homelessness in ways that they feel they would like to and they feel is important to them, because I think that looks different for everyone. So with that in mind, that's why we're joined today by Jaime Buxton. Hi, Jaime.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Jaime, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, where you are, your family, all of that.
Yeah. So first and foremost, one, I love Jesus. 2, I'm a married mom of 4 boys ranging from 15 to 7. And I have spent my entire career working for the City Mission in Cleveland, Ohio. And at the City Mission, we were founded over 100 years ago to, at that time, really be the hand of the church to people who were looking for jobs and security, who are coming to the big city, right? And so that's still who we are. We provide help and hope to all people, and we do that by sharing the gospel and holistic programs to men, women, and children. So, you know, I wouldn't call myself an expert in anything, but if I was an expert in something, I guess this is it, right? I had the opportunity because I worked at the mission so long. I got engaged, then married, and then when I started having a family, I had an incredible boss who knew how passionate I was about the ministry, that I was already in. And that time I was working in childcare at our women's crisis center called Laura's Home. And my boss said, I'm going to let you bring your kids to work. And so, I mean, obviously that happened over
Mm.
time. But as soon as I came back from maternity leave, my babies were in the room with me. You know, I was getting to nurse my son while I'm teaching a Bible lesson to kids living
That's
in
awesome.
crisis. And
Mm.
I just would have never even known to ask the Lord for that. And I just feel so blessed and really what a privilege it's been to continue in that ministry and get to raise my children like in it and with me. And so we've grown together a lot. And so this is a subject I'm crazy passionate about, is just helping anyone understand homelessness and the stigmas that we need to overcome and just rip off these labels that we have about homelessness. And then, but I love, especially like you said, Lauren, talking to kids who just that compassion and empathy is built in, and feed on that, help them understand. And so that they can be hopefully, you know, great human beings as children, but like grow up to people who only grow that empathy for others.
Yeah. So Jamie, can you give us just kind of like the broad strokes of homelessness, and maybe this can be just your experience or encounters, and then why you saw it fit and important to dedicate your life to this ministry.
Yeah. So if I'm being honest, you know, when I graduated with a degree in youth ministry and missions, and truly had no idea what I was going to do with that. In fact, I had interned at a ministry in Chicago, close to you all, and thought that that might be where I'd end up, but kind of fell into this ministry, kind of, you know, just really from having a friend in it, but just so quickly fell in love with the idea of coming alongside individuals kind of in their darkest and weakest time. Nobody wants, at least to start, right? Nobody makes this grand choice that I want to be homeless. I think there are many individuals that are stuck in homelessness, and it may seem to us as an outsider saying, oh, well, that's a choice at this point when it's been generations and generations, but it's really because it's comfortability. It's what they know. And so I love this opportunity to be able to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, kind of in this cycle of crisis. And when people are coming to us, at least, you know, in our ministry, it's they're really seeking something more because we're kind of known in the Cleveland area as we're not just a holding spot. It really is a program. And so I think we have people when they're kind of ready, or at least they think they're ready.
Yeah.
So homelessness is a really big deal. Like I said, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but when I go in and I speak to children or adults, really, if we're honest, and I said, close your eyes, Eddie and Lauren, and tell me what you see when you think of a homeless person. 9 times out of 10, people are saying male. They're thinking about someone who may be disabled. When we're walking out of a Guardians game here in Cleveland or a Browns game, yeah, a panhandler, someone who's, you know, and that's what I think people initially think. And that is not truly, at least not here in Cleveland, that's not the face of homelessness. While we do have some certain areas of tent camps, like you were referring to, Lauren, we're not like in LA, where homelessness is everywhere out in the streets and it's just kind of blatantly in your face. In Cleveland, we're talking about families who are living doubled up, which means they're living with friends or family members, a lot of times in not great, not safe situations. People living out of hotels and motels, living out of their car. And so it's that stigma of like what it looks like is very, very different. In Cleveland Metropolitan School District, so here, there's 3,000 kids that are school age that are assigned in school as homeless. They're labeled on their school paperwork, 3,000. And when I think about that number, I think, whoa, that's a huge number, right? I saw your faces. It's a huge number, but it's not like a badge of honor. So think about how many families where mom hasn't told the truth that they're living doubled up or they're living out of a shelter. Every shelter in Cleveland for women and children is full. So the face of homelessness really here in Cleveland is women with children. And unfortunately, my experience, and again, this is a very broad stroke, so I like that you asked it that way, Eddie, is these are not intact families most of the time. So a lot of people say, well, why don't you have a shelter for intact families? There is one shelter in Cleveland that can do that. It's pretty rare, though, that a dad has children or it's a whole intact family. But again, that's just my experience. So it's a really big deal. In the United States, 1 in 3 homeless people is a child. And I think I read 700,000 people are homeless. I'm sorry, children are homeless between the ages of 13 and 18. So this is a big deal. Homelessness is a really big deal. I mean, enough that we have, big government entities that are trying to tackle this. And so we're trying to tackle it as well.
You said that there's 3,000 kids enrolled in schools in the Cleveland metropolitan area that are labeled as homeless, in school. How do you go about talking to kids that are going into school that may interact with a classmate that is homeless? Because in like elementary school, the first time you're seeing, other people live differently than me in any type of area of like, they have a bigger house than me, or they have a smaller house than me, or they live somewhere else, is in elementary school. How do you talk to kids about how to interact with classmates who may be homeless?
So I always love teaching with a game. That's the kind of mom that I am. It's the kind of preschool teacher I was. So when I have the opportunity to talk to students, and it's interesting how that's had to kind of change over the years, because I think as I've been in this ministry longer, this is my 18th year at the city mission. I kind of spoke as, let's talk about homelessness as if no one in this room is homeless. And I've really had to change my own mindset. The Lord continues to humble me and teach me. And so being cognizant now, knowing that it's not just Cleveland metropolitan schools either, that every suburban school near us, all of the different school districts, we've had children from those areas, even some of the most elite school districts. We've had students that come to us and are living at Laura's home and still going to school. So I play a game and I show, this will say how old I am, I guess. It's like clip art different kinds of houses. So it's like cartoony and fun. And sometimes I'll even throw in like SpongeBob's house or whatever, but we're looking at like a castle. And I talk about, okay, we yell out, of course, because I love chaos. I love learning in chaos. So we yell out what kind of house it is, who lives in this house, and where we might find this kind of house. So we go from a castle to like a mud hut to an adobe to a teepee. And then we get into like kind of what you'd see like townhomes and apartments. And then we get to a duplex, and then it finalizes with a single family home. But by that point, the kids are tired. They think I'm ridiculous because we've answered all of these questions. And I make them think. They just say, well, it's a house. And I say, what kind of a house? And without fail, I think one time I had some really smart students who would just not say it, but I hear the same answers. That's a normal, regular house, right? Because that's what they're accustomed to. And so I say, oh, you guys all failed, right? And so, the connotation of normal or regular, I say, well, a mud hut is a normal, regular home in Africa, right? A log cabin is a normal, regular home if you live like in a wooded area or in the mountains. And we kind of go back through and talk about all of those things. And again, normalizing that we're all normal, right? And so when I get to sprinkle in Jesus, which is not most of the time when I'm in these places, we talk about the image of God and that as well. But we say, I immediately want to rip off those labels of what is normal, because we're all normal. And then I kind of go through a diagram of what Laura's home kind of looks like and talk about it. But so we start that way. So it's fun. It's learning. We're learning together. We've all failed, right? We all got to that wrong conclusion and start rebuilding from there. I wish it was that easy with adults, right?
Yeah.
But so then we talk about what does it mean to be homeless, and how can someone become homeless? And those are big questions for little minds, right? And so I listen to them. I like children to come up with their own ideas, and I feed on that, right? No matter how crazy it can be. we can get them back to, okay, whatever ground level is for learning there. So that's how I start.
Your story of like what kind of house is this reminds me of when we had our son. My sister brought her kids to come visit
Oh,
us,
no.
and we live in Chicago. Okay, we live in the city of Chicago, not downtown. We don't live in a high rise. We live in a 2-story
Okay.
walk up.
Inner city.
Yeah, and they live in Louisville, Kentucky, and you know, in Louisville, Kentucky, you can get like a 5-bedroom house for $250,000. Okay, you can't get even like anything here for
Barely
that.
that.
So they came to visit us. This was the first time they had ever come to our apartment, because usually we were at, my parents' house as like a mutual location. So they're coming into our house, and they're coming up the back stairwell, which is like where you put like all your junk. And like,
It's raggedy.
yeah,
Like any Chicago apartment, like back door
yeah, it's
walk
all
up
bad.
is raggedy.
Normally it's outside. Ours happened to be enclosed, but it's still raggedy. So our niece, she was probably 7 or 6 at the time. She's walking up and she goes, "Are you guys gonna clean this place up?" And I was like, "Oh, no. This is like basically outside. I know it's like enclosed, but this is like basically outside. And first of all, this is not our house. We're renting it, and so we can't change anything. And this is just what it's
Right.
like. This is what it's like to live in a city apartment." And then she gets inside and she's like, "Oh, you did clean up in here." And I was like, "Yeah." Like, it's not like moldy wood like you just saw outside, but just like a totally different experience of, oh, people live differently than me. And I think just watching her experience that for the first time was even eye-opening for me to be like, oh yeah, like you don't know what it's like. This is our norm, but this is not your
Right.
norm. And for kids to think about someone that lives totally opposite of them is like a big revelation for them.
Right. And so even when we're going through that exercise, I'll say, does anyone live in a duplex? And inevitably there is someone, or I've gone on vacation on a houseboat, and I'm like, oh, wasn't that fun? And isn't that different? And, then we talk about why you can't have a houseboat in Cleveland year round because it's too cold. But, like we go off on those so that we have some shared experience, and that they can be, that they can kind of lead those discussions like, oh, I've been in a log cabin, or, some are not great descriptions, but we're able to talk about them. And again, normalizing that to say, just because you haven't and that's not your experience doesn't mean that it's worse than this normal, regular single family home, right?
Right. As your kids have kind of grown up with you at the city mission, what have been some questions that they've had for you along the way?
Goodness, it's so funny. They've had less questions than you'd think, because I think they learned early on, like, oh wait, these are kids just like me. One of the hardest things has been, families only stay with us 6, 9, 12 months. And my kids were there for the long haul, and well, where did they go? And, or where are they living now? And, in a lot of ways, sometimes my kids were jealous because they were like, they get to live here and play here. But yeah, I think they've had far less questions than I think, because there is nothing different about the children who are staying there other than their living circumstances, right? And I kind of love that. I mean, again, I didn't know to ask God for this opportunity, but I love that their life has been normal, coming alongside kids who are in crisis. But they look just like them, they talk just like them, they go to school, they like the same video games, they want the same pair of LeBron tennis shoes. I mean, you name it, there are far more commonalities than there are differences. So I feel like the questions have been fewer than anyone would have anticipated.
Yeah, this just kind of came to mind while you're saying that. It's like the short-termness of people who are experiencing homelessness in whatever area they are at. We went to a church in Uptown that we had a lot of people experiencing homelessness that would attend there, and you become like friends with these people, and then just like one day they're not there anymore because they're moving to a different shelter, or they've got to live with a family, a relative or something, or they, unfortunately had to go back onto the streets and they're not coming to church anymore. And I remember feeling like really sad about that. Like, oh, I expected to see this person every week at church and interact with them at
Right.
church. How do you deal with like such a rapidly changing relationships with people that like you may never see
Yeah,
again?
it's really hard. That is probably the hardest part
Mm.
of my job. And while I'm in a less like resident facing role now in my job, it was one of the most difficult things because especially, our kids would become friends. We were moms together.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
saw me on my bad days. So that is difficult, and ministry is hard that way, right? Like pastors see people come and go, pastors come and go.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, for me, and what makes it a little more problematic in this ministry is just that even then, if I'd run into someone outside, 6 months, 12 months, it happens from time to time that I run into a past resident. They may not want to see me or admit why they know me. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't be like, hey, it's Miss Jamie from Lawrenceville. Remember me? And like
Yeah.
being okay with that, while our relationship was good, I may not represent something that was awesome for them.
Yeah.
I hope, that they have more good memories or, ideas of what happened, because the goal is life transformation, right? But I may not represent
Mm-hmm.
that, or at least my part in it. And so
Yeah.
being okay with that too is really humbling. Like, 'cause it's like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm Jamie. I'm here to save the world, right? And I think we as Christians can get that complex, and it's not about us. And so,
Yeah.
it's difficult, and that was the most difficult
Mm-hmm.
thing for my kids, because sometimes we would
Yeah.
know a family was going and could prepare ourselves, but then other times, like big things change and change very quickly when you're in a cycle of crisis, right? And so a family could,
Mm-hmm.
for a good or bad reason, leave quickly. And that was always
Yeah.
challenging. Yeah. Not being able to say
Mm-hmm.
goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something unique about the church building was, um, it was so we met like in a theater, and the shelter was like on the
The
first
basement.
floor or the basement. So they would always just kind of like come upstairs, and even to this day, like there's still like people that I still remember like
Mhm.
having like relationships with, and then just like all of a sudden they just weren't around anymore, or they'd be gone for a few months and like come
Mhm.
back. And yeah, it was kind of sad,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we would talk about life and about Christ, and I was a worship leader at the time, so we talk about music, and then just kind of like those relationships just kind of like
Yeah.
you know wither away. It was just
Mm-hmm.
a little unfortunate, but
Yeah.
to be able to still remember
Right.
them, I think it's still really
Yeah.
important.
In whether it's your kids or kids that you're teaching about homelessness, has there been anything that has been like kind of eye-opening for you, like questions that they ask and you're like, oh, that's kind of humbling, or that's something I never thought of, or convicting? Is there something they've taught you?
That's a really good question. Maybe it's not as surprising, and we've kind of alluded to it, as just how quickly kids can kind of debunk
Mm.
what we think. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like just how, I go through that small lesson, it's 15 minutes of looking at cartoon houses, and they're like all in, right? And I think about how long it took me to like, because I think adults, I'm continuously asked, what's the number one reason people are homeless? And like, it's got to be drug addiction. It's got to be this. And it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, like, and it took me, I think, years to kind of
Mm-hmm.
figure out how I can kind of explain and help come alongside people and understanding that. But kids are like, oh, okay, well, bad stuff happens. It gets out of control. They come to you for help, or they're seeking help. And so, just and I'm not even talking about Christian kids, right? Like I'm just talking about kids. And so, I think that's the most challenging thing. And like, because my kids, not that they're super Christians, because I assure you they are not, and they are little stinkers. But I can even become blinded. Like the story you were saying when we started, Lauren. I can see someone by the side of the road and
Mhm.
just be like, oh, but I'm on my way to the mission. Like, Lord, you know my heart. Like, I love homeless people,
Yeah.
but like, don't make eye contact. Let's just move on, right? And my third son, Asher, it just like that is not for him. He wants to know, what can we do? How can we help? What's the
Mm.
right thing to do? And so he often is my little challenger.
Mm.
And do you see that person? Should we have stopped? So yeah, I think just how quickly kids can just like rip away like what other people think and come and be like, we gotta help people, or
Mm.
that's a normal person like me. So
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of been hinting at that throughout this conversation. But what are the common misconceptions about homelessness that we are either teaching our kids consciously or subconsciously based on, again, like what we
Mhm.
assume
right.
homelessness is.
Yeah. So I think the number one thing that bothers me, and the number one thing that really, is apparent, like on our social media when we're sharing the work that we're doing at the city mission, and we're not alone. But people will say, "Well, homeless people are just lazy. Why can't they
Mhm.
just get a job? Why don't they work at McDonald's or any fast food?" There's tons of job openings, and um, gosh, those are really hard things to see because you can't fight with people on
Yeah.
social media. Well, people try. But like, um, just trying to help some understand, we have a woman with 3 children. To even go have an interview, she'd
Mm.
have to leave her children unattended to go to an interview.
Mhm.
And then let alone if she gets the job, how quickly she can get childcare, if she can get a voucher and then find a suitable childcare. And then how many hours a week she'd have to work at said fast food restaurant, and it would be like 100 hours a week. And then we'd probably say, well, why isn't this woman taking care of her children? And like
Yeah.
Mm.
so many of
Yeah.
those things that, it's just not simple answers. If it was a simple answer, the government would have figured it out by now. The
Right.
church would have completely figured it out, right? Like we wouldn't have homelessness anymore. But
Mhm.
it's layers and layers of crisis that are peeling back and helping someone and coming alongside someone. So our ministry really consists of a longer holistic ministry because we want to get to know the individual and
Mm.
what is keeping them from living
Mhm.
self-sufficiently. And so that can be so many different things, unhealthy relationships. It can be addictions. It can be mental health. It can be physical health. It can
Mhm.
be um, um, divorce, or, I mean, there's so many things. And I think that for me has been still, even after 18 years, no two stories are the same. And the depth of the hurt and crisis and trauma that coincide when someone is living without a home. So I forget your question now, Eddie.
Yeah, so basically, like the second half of the question is like, what do you think we are either consciously or subconsciously like teaching our kids?
Yeah. So I think that we can, and I can. I'm speaking to myself here. I do not pretend to be perfect, but that homeless people may be lazy,
Mm.
or
Mm.
the stigma of mental health, or dirty,
Mm.
or so many of those things. I mean, like I said, when you close your eyes and picture it, what is homelessness? But I think number one is the lazy, and that they
Mm.
don't care about helping themselves.
Yeah.
I think for sure that's a big stigma in the tent camp areas like that you
Mhm.
were describing, Lauren, that people are like, well, this is their choice. Well, I mean, you can bend that how you want, but when it's all that when you've been raised in generational poverty,
Mm.
just the same way that living in suburbia is how I was raised, so that's where I'm most
Mhm.
comfortable. Whatever that is, that's what you know, and so it's not necessarily your choice so much as
Mm.
this is how you've lived, and now it's the only way you know how to live.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's it. The laziness, or that they don't want to help
Mm.
themselves.
Yeah, I think this was really eye opening for me when I became a student at Moody, because the campus is like right on the outskirts of downtown. If you've ever been here,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of like pockets, right, of just like homelessness, just everywhere. And as Moody students, they're usually like at least the first 2 years, they're like really active in the community, whether it's like evangelism or whether it's just like hanging out like with homeless people. We were just kind of always doing something different, usually like on weeknights and things like that. And um, sometimes we would hang out with homeless people, and these people are like, again, like it kind of like whole debunks the thing of like all these, like they can't like help themselves, or like they don't, like they're not educated, or this is like the bad decisions that they made. But like we've talked to like people who have degrees. We've talked to people who used to be like CEOs of companies,
Mhm.
who are smart and eloquent, and
Mhm.
but again, like the entire story, of course, like we don't like really know. But
Right.
like again, like that whole segment of like, well, these people are just kind of like the bottom of,
Mm.
the bottom of the crop, and that, like
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's not like true.
Mhm.
And so for me, again, it was just a very eye-opening experience, because when you actually got to talk to these people, it was just like wow, like this is not, again, this is like not what I thought,
Yeah.
this would be like. And
Mm.
for the most part, like they would like never ask us for anything. Sometimes they just like want to talk,
Mhm.
and again, I think that's also something that we might also struggle with too, is that we just sometimes just right away want to do stuff,
Yeah.
right? But we
Right.
also don't want to like actually take the time to like get to know these people, and like hear their stories, and like see where they are, where they've come from.
Mhm.
Yeah. This is the Jamie Buxton opinion, so not
Mhm.
anybody else's. But, when somebody does ask me what is the biggest theme, I say the reason people experience homelessness is because they don't have an intact, healthy support system. One of the other biggest fallacies about homeless individuals or people experiencing homelessness is they don't have families. Well, of course, many of them have families. Very few are living in this area alone, but they don't have families. They've been raised in generational poverty, or they're coming out of trauma, that they don't have families who can help support them, which is why we'll see at Laura's home 3 generations of a family
Mm.
come to us because, something I didn't understand is if you have senior housing, so let's say you're the matriarch, you're the grandmother of a family, and you're living in government housing, right? You're living in government housing, and it's for seniors. Um, if your daughter then has an issue with her children and she comes to stay with you over 14 days, that breaks the contract of your housing agreement.
Mm.
And so we'll see 3 generations of a family come to us because grandma tried to help her daughter and her grandchildren. I mean, so there's no lack of love or family. It's just the resources.
Yeah.
And financial resources are just one of the many resources that an individual needs, right?
Mhm.
But I think so many times people think, oh, finances is the number one issue. It's really not. It's an intact support system with role models and support systems. And so, yeah, you're right. I think they're seeking community just like any of us,
Yeah.
just like I want community and support. That's exactly what they're missing, and the healthy part of that. And so, yeah,
Yeah. For those kids who, like you said, I think you said your middle son and the our friend I talked about earlier, kids who are really sensitive to those experiencing homelessness. How do you suggest getting our kids involved in serving those who are homeless?
yeah. Well, I loved the story that you told. Something that I do, and I will say I'm guilty right now. We need to replenish and get restocked, but I like to carry snack bags.
Mm.
That way, lots of people ask me, should I give somebody money knowing that they could use it for drugs or alcohol? And I'm like, if your conscience is saying to you that you want to give somebody money, then I am not going to stop you. Does every homeless person use it for something negative? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
So if that's your question, then, or if that's how the Lord is leading you, then by all means, give money. We'll do snack bags, and I've had the opportunity to speak at several churches about this, and they just make like little homeless care kits that might have some small hygiene
Mm.
items, a toothbrush and toothpaste. And in our community, I'm sure I meant to do a little research before this. This exists in most big cities, I would think. We have what we call a street card,
Mm.
and it's a list of all of the shelters and all of the
Mhm.
places that have food pantries and clothing giveaways. And so to have an updated street card on a bag with a granola bar and maybe,
Mhm.
crackers and then some hygiene items, and then I think a bus pass for us here at Cleveland, it's an all-day bus pass. It's about $5. And so you know that if you give somebody these resources, they can use that bus pass any way they'd like, and they could get to any of those places on that list within the day. And to me, that's a dignified way of blessing someone. And you're taking those big questions out. Well, what are they going to do with the money? You're taking that off of your back, right? And so, but you're giving a great resource to someone. So that's what I think is best. But you know, if you're not carrying around a homeless care kit, and a lot of times, of course, we're not. Do what you see fit. As an organization, we've also created little maps that say how to get to our men's crisis center and to our women's crisis center. And we do tell people, you know, pair that with a bus pass so that people can get to us. So I think that's a dignified way of giving somebody help. And it's helped my children. You know, I'd love to say that anytime I see a homeless person, I throw them in the car and take them. My oldest, much to his dismay, would be so embarrassed because I did that once with all my kids in tow. My husband was not super pleased with me, but we did. We picked up a woman who was fresh out of jail in our little suburban community and needed a ride to the other side of town. And I mean, it was nothing but the Lord, but I don't know what I was thinking outside of, I'm just going to do this. Okay, God. And we put this woman in the car. I handed my phone to my son and said, anything goes bad, call dad. And so and we drove her 25 minutes across town. I don't know if that's the most, you know, that's probably not the smartest thing to always do, but you do what the Lord leads you, right? And when you have little eyes watching you, like I know you guys know now, and you'll have even more of that soon. It's amazing how their little minds and their little hearts can convict you to do the right thing or just do something different than you've done it before. So even the granola bars was my Asher's idea, because he was like, sometimes I'm in a hurry, like I said, and I'm just like, no, we're not stopping, and not, or I don't have any cash or whatever. So yeah, I think those are important things to let them have a little skin in the game and think about what's important.
What would you, kind of as a final closing thought, what do you see in scripture of how we as Christians in the church should serve those experiencing homelessness?
Oh, goodness, so many things, but I even took some notes because I knew I didn't want to mess this part up. But of course, you know, Matthew 25, right? Whatever you did for the least of these. I mean, I think that's the go-to, but goodness, I was reading in Proverbs, the generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. And again, in an earlier verse in Proverbs, whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered. I mean, like, these are big things that God calls us to. And I mean, it's not questionable. It's not like, oh, what does he mean by, does that mean homeless? I'm like, it says poor. Like, this is, to me, it's just black and white. Like, God calls us to love individuals who are experiencing homelessness, experiencing crisis, and living without the kind of resources that we have. And he calls us to compassionately come alongside them and share. And so even if we don't have a lot to share, right? Like, because sometimes I'm like, I don't have much, God. Yeah, I think he's pretty black and white about it. And that's certainly not just how I want to live, but certainly how I want to teach my kids, right? And I think it's so, so, so important.
Yeah.
Well, great, Jamie. This was amazing. I have learned a lot. I know, and again, this is something that, at least us living here in the city, Chicago, you know, experience almost on a daily basis. And so now it's for me, it's like kind of like a reshaping how I might look at, you know, someone, right? Because again, our minds want to go somewhere immediately, but now it's just like, no, like, that person has a story, and I don't know what it is, you know. And yeah, being able to now walk our son, you know, through this, I think we feel a little bit more better equipped to do that. So thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. With all of our episodes, we like to end with a benediction. So if you would please join us in that. To him who is able to do far more than we can understand, may he give us the wisdom to raise our children to first love God above all else, and love others as themselves. Go in peace.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Jamie, for joining us. And thank you to the listener for catching us again. We ask you to subscribe, follow, rate. Those reviews and ratings really help us find other people like you who'd want to listen. So go into the Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you listen, and rate us. And we will catch you next Wednesday. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Car Seat Questions podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and just let us know what you thought.
Be sure to follow us on YouTube, wherever you find your podcasts, Instagram, TikTok, basically anywhere, and drop your comments below about what you thought about the episode.